Hello and thanks for joining us. I am Vin Martin Obiora Ilo. Change, or for some people, innovation, is the process of transforming a vision into a new reality that delivers the promised benefits. This was the opinion of David Shaw, an authority on managing change and a faculty at the Harvard University. Our topic today is change, and I have someone who has been part of change but also decided to put his experience, his challenges, and the challenges of other people like him in written form. He wrote a book. It is impossible. If you minus the I am, it becomes it is possible, influencing change in Nigeria. My pleasure to welcome Jude Udo Ilo, a development scholar and practitioner who has graciously joined us for this program. Jude, you're welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So, that was what David Shaw said. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think that people understand the concept of change in various ways, but I think he captures it moving from one point to another. It doesn't necessarily have to be forward, it could also be backwards. So I think the universe is in a constant flow of change, so to say, because nothing remains the same. So I do agree with him to the extent that it's about going from one point to another point. But of course, in the context of the work we do, it is about going from one point to a better point.
It has to be better for it to be change.
It has to be better for it to be good change.
Good, because because I also know that some people walk back.
Yes.
Is a kind of change, but a negative change. So you came out with this book, It is Possible, Influencing Change in Nigeria. What informed your decision, to come out with a book like this?
It's a product of frustration. So
frustration?
Yes.
How do you mean?
Yes. So that's the interesting part. So the reality is that working in this space of the development space and working in a place like Nigeria or in Africa, and over the years trying to see how we can get reforms to happen, how we get government to behave differently, how we get the lives of people to be better, there is a general sense of frustration that comes with it, because it looks like the more you put in, the more the sad stories come out. So in my head, I was also at the point where I was wondering, was it all worth it? What are we actually doing? Because the people, the communities that we serve, don't appear to be better off than they were when we started. And so I started having this internal debates in my head, where it was like a kind of a debate between despondency and optimism. But it also allowed me to look at what has happened over the years, what has worked, what has not worked. And it became clear to me that there are a lot of positives that we can actually look at. And of course there are negatives. But the negatives do not suggest that change is impossible. It rather suggests to me that change is difficult. The positives then suggest to me that change is possible, because if in little corners it can happen, then of course it can go up in big waves. So that is on a personal level. But of course there were other external circumstances that gave rise to this book. One was the conversation I had about Ford Foundation in West Africa, when they were doing their strategic New Year strategy session, and they said, we want to interrogate how we can better use our funding to ensure change. And as part of that conversation, I facilitated a session for them where we looked at a number of case studies just to see how movements were successful or how programs were successful and the ones that were not successful. And when we finished, it was such an illuminating exercise that they felt their grantees and their partners needed to be part of that kind of thinking process, just to re-examine and reflect on the work they've been doing. And so we had a kind of a country-wide engagement with roughly about 50 to 60 CEOs, leaders of NGOs across the country, asking the question, how does change happen and how can you make it happen? So from all of that and my own personal research and my own personal debates, I felt there was something to share. And I didn't want to do it in a technical way. So hence the primer. So something that is introductory, basic, sharing some of those ideas and inviting people to start reflecting a bit more on the strategic impact of the work they do rather than just the immediate output or immediate gratification, so to say. Yeah.
I am a little puzzled by the style you employed in writing this book. I went through the book from page 1 to 128, and I can surely say that no chapter was probably more than 3 or 5 pages. In other words, because you called it a primer, you wanted, in quotes, to make it simplistic.
Yes.
If that is what you try to do, why did you choose that pattern? Why did you choose that style for a book this serious that you could say is targeted at development practitioners, experts, and what have you? Why did you simplify? Why did you try to bring it down?
So I'm a trained lawyer, and the biggest grief you can give me is to say that I write like a lawyer, because sometimes we write as lawyers and we don't communicate. And over the years, I've worked as an advocate, engaging with policymakers, the public, young people, old people. And if there's something I've learned, is that anything you can't explain to a 10-year-old, you're doing a terribly bad job in communication. Secondly, I don't like unnecessarily technical books. Okay? Because the people who you want to apply this into their daily lives are just everyday people. So the idea was to make sure that any 10-year-old who picks up this book can read through it. Is to make sure that any expert who picks up this book will find something in it. So it was a tricky balance, but it does appear from the feedback we've received that we were able to achieve that, because we simply just told stories and analyzed those stories in a way that it is easy for everybody to get. The second thing again is that people are busy. We know that there are lots of literature out there, social media, all of those things. The target again is that in 3 hours, if you're waiting in an airport lobby, you can finish this book before you board your flight. If you're a kid, you come back from school in the evening, you can read 4 or 5 chapters before you go to sleep. So it's, yes, to your point, it's a very serious conversation. But it's also in the seriousness of that conversation that it dissuades people from getting involved in it, because, oh, it's technical, it's change. And so by breaking it down and making it simple, we're also inviting people to embrace that interrogation of how change happens, but also in a way that is easy to read and to understand and to critique, because we also got some very good feedback from people who are saying, oh, but you should have said this, or I don't agree with this. Making sure that we have that conversation across the spectrum. Young, old, learned, unlearned, anybody can interact with the book.
In chapter 15 of your book, entitled Lighting Small Fires, you said, the flames that engulf a forest starts with a flick. When you have the flick put in multiple directions, the fire spreads faster and snowballs into a huge flame. A book I read recently said that never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. In other words, small groups, which aligns with your lighting
small fires.
Small fires. Talk to us more about this and how that helps in the change process.
Well, that's a great question. So remember I said it was my frustration. But when you interrogate the things that have worked or things that have not worked, you see a pattern. And the pattern is simple. When a lot of people are sold onto an issue, it creates a wave. It becomes an issue. It becomes important. So one example I used in the book was the work that has been done around gender-based violence over the years. So when I was leading Osiwa and I had returned from my fellowship as an Eisenhower Fellow in the United States, part of the things I tried to study during that fellowship was how to mobilize citizens. And that took me across the south of the United States, spending time in places like Atlanta, Montgomery, Birmingham, Mississippi, and all of that. Just looking at how people were able to rally each other together to face a common cause. And the second part of it was going to organizations that worked around gender-based violence to get a sense on how they were able to mobilize. So when I came back to Nigeria and we started looking at our program in Osiwa, we came up with an acronym that we call PAS, P-A-S, Prevention, Accountability, and Support for Gender-Based Violence. Now, every action that people take or that have been taken in Nigeria across on issues of gender-based violence fall under these three categories. But we had never really looked at them in a way that understands their complementarity and how they support each other in making the case. So part of the resources we put in then was to have a cohort of people working in some of these areas. So we had people who were providing safe homes for women. We had groups who were lobbying government to adopt laws that will protect women. We had groups who were working on ensuring that those who indeed do these things are held accountable. We had other groups who were also providing support to those who have survived or to organizations who are doing this work on the field and who are of course going through the mental pain of managing such a critical issue. And we saw how all of this complemented each other. And so when the Abuja raid happened, where women were just unduly harassed by state agencies, and we brought together the concerned Abuja citizens, it was a clear example of what complementarity, the little fires, can do. So we had people who were tech people, we had people who were working on media, we had lawyers who were representing these women, we had those who were mobilizing people to protest, we had a group that was providing support for the women who had already been arrested and all of that. And there were subcommittees within the concerned Abuja Citizens platform. And it was hugely successful. Just being able to bring together all the work people are doing in various directions and making it turn into a thing. And of course, it went on, the federal government declared state of emergency, there was public probe, and of course, we've seen a lot of progress in that area. So it just tells me simply that everybody who is doing something positive in any particular area or in any given ecosystem must think carefully of how their work is complementing the work of others. And if everybody find that nexus of complementarity and build it up, it then builds the strong ecosystem, makes those engagements a bit much more powerful than it would have been if one person was doing it. And it's the same thing everywhere in the world.
So you advocate for partnerships, collaboration in working for change.
That's
People must work together.
That's the only way.
Is that what you're
My thesis is without collaboration, you can't be successful.
So because the small fires have to
it has to
be
come
tied
together. And it just look, if you look at that illustration, if you go into a forest and you put fire here, put fire here, put fire here, and they burn in opposite direction, nothing happens. But they have to come together. They have to meet each other at some point, and then it becomes a big flame that then gives you what you want. The other point is, through history, there has been no case where one person achieved change. And I made an illustration in the book, about the salvation history as we know it. So God is all powerful. So he could have very well have just said, oh, the world is saved. But he sent his son. He needed a woman in Mary to be his mother. He needed the 12 apostles. He needed the Romans to play their parts. He needed Pilate to convict him. So somehow, even that the biblical illustration shows clearly that change, even at the point of the divine, requires collaboration. It could be argued that, oh, well, common is an extreme case, but it's a reality. And through history, at every point in time where a society gets a seismic change or something really, really gives, it requires the collaboration of a whole lot of people. Maybe an inspiration of one, but the effort of many.
If I look at your creation illustration, I am led to say that for change to succeed, it has to be localized.
Yes.
I assume that if God was almighty and didn't localize his mightiness and his godness, that probably it would be difficult to relate with God.
Yeah.
So how do you make change localized and relatable to the people?
So in the book I also talked about, you cannot do the national thing about changing Nigeria or changing the continent without changing the communities. Because there has to be a grounded ownership. There has to be a grounded ownership. And I'll go back again to the illustration of gender-based violence. So, if you pass a law now that says, you know what, if you molest a woman, if you do this, you do that, you'll be punished. Great law. But it's there. It has to be enforced. People have to come forward to report that something has happened. The communities need to be in agreement that if people do this thing, they have to be punished. It won't be a case of nobody in our community can go to the police. We have to settle it in-house. So if the communities, which is the basic and the first line of interaction with individuals, do not buy into what you're trying to do, no case will ever come there. No witnesses will ever show up. Nobody will ever report anything. And so, as much as you try to build the national narrative or national consensus, people need to believe in your message.
So
and embrace it.
Is it bottom top or top to bottom?
I think it could go both ways. There's been time the creativity and courage of a community sparks up something in the whole of the country, because a small group dared to do something. Just think about women's riots,
or even the Arab Spring.
Exactly. So this guy kills himself, burns himself, and then the whole region goes into flame. The About Women's revolution. This was just local women, but what they did there created such a wave, both locally and internationally, that it forced the colonial masters to think carefully. You can also have a situation where you have an exceptional leader, people like Mandela, who come in, and because of their vision and the way they related to the people, the people buy into it. So it could be both ways. The inspiration can come either from a leader or from the led.
I believe that your frustration, which inspired this book, fundamentally came from Nigeria, where we were born, where you have practiced for so many years before you went abroad to lead an international organization, the Civilians in Conflict, that is based in Netherlands. So let's localize our conversation with Nigeria. Another book I read said that transformational leaders have to understand how to provide for their populations. And it goes further to say they must be honest, they must be confident, they must be disciplined, and finally they must lead by example. If this makes sense to you, do you think any of this has taken place in Nigeria? That's number one. Number two is that in your book, you have hinged a good percentage of the success of change on leadership.
Yes.
So
yeah. So leadership is not about position. So leadership can be provided by people who are not in positions of authority, but they have the charisma or the ability to rally people together. So just to say that I think leadership is important, and it's not just based on on your position of authority or power. It's about your capability to inspire people and get them to move from one point to another. So to your question about remarkable leaders, so in the book I talked about Sam Mbakwe, and it was where I was talking about leading by example, just to the point of this, to the quote you have. So this was a politician who, in a place like Nigeria, was able to rally his states to donate their own money towards starting off the construction of an airport. And we know that the relationship between Nigerians and the states is a rent relationship. It is extractive, what we can get out of government. That's why we call it national cake or state cake or whatever it is. But this leader was able to get people to give their money because they trust him, because they felt he was a man of integrity, because they've seen that he's a man that they can be trusted with their money. And so they willingly did it. And Sam wasn't different from other politicians in terms of he didn't have two heads. But he was a different breed who everybody was convinced put the interests of the people ahead of himself. And Nigerians, or the people of Imo State, responded to that kind of leadership. And which simply says that if you have the right kind of leadership, people will follow. People will get inspired. But sadly, if there has been one unfortunate character of the Nigerian state over the years, is the lack and the absence of inspirational leaders. We've been visited with a breed of mediocre leaders, people who find it difficult to be bold, visionary, and to submit themselves to the welfare of the Nigerian people. And because we don't have that kind of exceptional leadership, it has not allowed us to unlock who we are. And people will say, oh no, the followers also have a responsibility. Yes, I do agree. But that's a reason why there has to be a leader. It means he leads or she leads and people follow. And when you have a bad one, before you stop navigating the wrong road the person has taken you down to, you've lost a lot of time.
So, still talking about a country like Nigeria, how can leadership, even when they don't initiate change, how can leadership facilitate change or create the enabling environment for change and change actors to make progress?
We can also go back again, look into history or lessons from across the world to get some insight about what has worked. If there's anything everybody agrees on, is on human development. That as a country, as a people, as a state, the focus, the priority should be about human development. Making sure that the skills and the talents within that country is enhanced. That is, it is given the space to shine. It is given the opportunity to bloom. And when you invest in human development, you've built about the biggest natural resource you can ever have. And the good example of that is the story of Singapore. In 2007, I was fortunate to be in the same room with Lim Kuan Yew, and he was asked the question, what are the things that made Singapore successful? What's the trick? And his first answer was human development. They invested money, time, energy in young people, making sure they had the best kind of education, making sure they have the best kind of orientation. And he said to us that I sent a lot of them to the Ivy League colleges, and I know some of them will not come back. But I believe that even if just one person came back, the person will make a difference. And it paid off, because the bureaucracy, the Singapore bureaucracy, is one of the most sophisticated in terms of effectiveness across the world. And it's simply because he made that investment. So to your question, I would say human development, human development, human development. Natural resources without human development is a total waste, frankly.
So, can change happen with collaboration between the people and the government?
It can happen without. That's the only way it can happen. Because let's not forget, government controls the levers of power. Government controls almost everything.
So if you have an unwilling government, that makes it impossible for change to happen?
Not impossible, but difficult. Because even an unwilling government can also be defeated by the will of the people.
So how do change advocates, how do they manage this very important relationship between them and the leaders?
So there are people who work in the space who are not interested in working with government. They focus their work in mobilizing communities, and the communities then make their demands, because the communities they're a voting bloc. They can exercise social pressure and political pressure, and so for some people, just work with the communities and let the communities make their demands. But I do think, there's no government that knows it all. So we also have to acknowledge that sometimes the failings of government might not necessarily be out of bad will. It could also be out of lack of expertise. Secondly, it could also be out of bad will. But in all of this, you cannot afford to not engage. Right? Now, how do you work with an unwilling government? You have to create disincentives and incentives. Disincentives could mean having those communities understand that the government is not working in their benefit, and then making that political demand or creating political sanctions for that kind of bad behavior. Incentive could be about making the government understand the potentials that are existing for which they can benefit as a government if they tap into it. There are no easy answers. It's infuriatingly difficult to move things forward, especially in a bureaucracy like Nigeria, where the technical government is not as efficient as desirable, and the political government is often corrupt, undermining whatever is left of the technical government. So it's a bit of a bad mix.
Could this be the point you were trying to make in chapter 18, where you talked about capacity to talk to the enemy, in quotes?
Yes. So I do not think, again, it is possible to move things forward by saying, I'm not going to talk to these people.
So why did you describe them as enemies?
That's why I put it in quotes. Yeah, because a lot of people see, what they call the othering, the other people, the other side. So we create this notion of, I can't work with this person is really, really bad, and my integrity, I can't be seen with this person. But unfortunately, it's not about what you like, it's about what is practical. So say you have a minister who is incredibly bad. but he holds the pen. He's the one who can sign or not sign. He's the one who is making policy decisions about something that affects people you care about. You have to engage. Convince him, or at least get him not to do any harm. And the Mandela example again is a very clear example. This is a man who's been kept in prison for decades. The son died, couldn't bury the son. The mother died, he couldn't bury his mother. They used his wife to impose serious damages, emotional damages on him, seeing the way the wife was being maltreated, kept in solitary confinement and all of that. They did everything possible to break him. The only thing they did not do was try to kill him. But he said to himself, if I do not talk to these people, South Africa will not be free. And so he said, it's when you talk to your enemies, then they become your partners. And I think it is a very powerful approach to influencing change. You talk about Dr. King in the United States, the ability to talk to the white people, the ability to talk to the business community, who were actually the ones making life difficult. You know, the separate body call. He knew he needed them to be in support, or at least not to fight against him, not a fight against the cause of the black people. So we just have to. It's not...
Must change always be violent?
It doesn't have to.
Can we achieve change like what happened in India with Mahatma Gandhi, and what happened in the US with somebody like Dr. King? How can we... Must it be violent, especially in African and developing countries, for change to happen?
It doesn't have to. A lot of times we see violence as a response of government.
You know why I say this is, if we look at the Ghana example, when Jerry Rawlings took over, and then the killings and what have you.
Yeah.
Must we?
No, it doesn't have to be. I think the Jerry Rawlings' approach, those are the exceptions for me. You know, I mean, I'm all for implementing law and order, yes, because a state has to maintain law and order. But I do think that a lot of times we've seen bloodshed when people are agitating for something. It's oftentimes the response of the perpetrators, the response of the beneficiaries of the inequalities that creates the violence, because they want to deny the people the opportunity to make change happen. And remember what Kennedy says about those who resist non-violent change. When you do that, you're creating an avenue for violence. So it doesn't have to be, and I don't think that should be the language of change makers. And you know, in the book again, when we say talk to your enemy, when we say build collaboration, when we say respect the other side, when we say avoid disparaging language, these are all ways of ensuring that we have a healthy debate and a healthy engagement with the other. And even for people we do not like and people we feel are against us, there has to be a common ground. You know, Cardinal Francis Arinze said something in one of his books. He said that no man is wrong all the time, because even a damaged clock is correct 2 times a day. And I think it's profound when we begin to look at our position as dogma, as the golden standard, without the humility and modesty to listen to the other side and understand what their concerns are. We make conversations difficult, and when we can't have conversations, we can't work together. When we can't work together, we can't have change.
Glad to know you're still with us, and our guest is Jude Udo Ilo, who just came out with a book, It's Possible, Influencing Change in Nigeria. Don't go away. When we return, we'll look at how not to carry out advocacy for change. Glad to know you're still with us on this program. where we are looking at a new book that talks about change. Influencing change in Nigeria, it is possible. My guest is still Jude Udo Ilo. Jude is a development practitioner and scholar. Jude used to be the Nigerian lead for Open Society for West Africa. Jude also led the Civilians in Conflict, a global NGO that is headquartered in Washington, that has what I can call an operational office in Netherlands, where he led as executive director. Jude is also founder of the Thought and Miss Advisory. So Jude, political change occurs when a country, government or a leader changes. And then it was George Bernard Shaw, that also said that progress is impossible without change, and those who cannot change their minds cannot do anything. But we talked about leadership and change to some point. But just before I go to the part D of your book, where you talked about how advocacy should be carried out. It's actually entitled How Not to Carry Out Advocacy. Let me finally ask you, talking about leadership and change. This is Nigeria. You've also been a change agent. You've worked with people outside Nigeria, countries outside Nigeria. I know that at some point you were part of the elections in Zimbabwe. I don't know whether it was Namibia or some other one. So you've also interacted with people and leaders outside the country. What is the peculiar problem of change in Nigeria, especially as it concerns political change and the leadership of our country?
I don't think there's a Nigeria specific problem. I think it's all similar. You know, government that is extractive, that is taking from the people and not giving back. You see it across the whole spectrum in Africa. Of course, you have a few countries where things are different, but you see extractive government. You see governments that are not interested in playing by the rules, as long as it is not in their benefit. It's only the rule if it's in their benefit. You see a system that is exclusionary. Those who are not in any way affiliated with government may not get the benefits of that government. You see state capture, where the institutions of government, in this case electoral management bodies, the judiciary, the media, all beholden to the government, and they use them to exert undue pressure and influence on the electoral process. So it is not really limited to the Nigerian story. It is the character of a lot of what I now call quasi-democracies in Africa. So it's not just about Nigeria. However, it also creates this debate about what kind of democracy are we practicing, what kind of political system should we be embracing in Africa, should we go back to our roots, whatever that means, or is this imposed or is this Western? But I disagree with those kind of conversation because they miss the point. The point is that leadership has to be inclusive. Whatever system you want to put in place, it has to be a leadership where every member of the society feels they have a stake in how it comes about, in how it is run, and in how it is assessed for what it has done. It has to be for the service of the people. So you are there and you're serving the people. You are the servant leader in every sense of the word. and not in your own interest. So if the interest of the people is not placed above your own personal interest, then it becomes a problem. And so political leadership for me, or the system of politics, or the democracy we practice, needs to have the character of inclusion, best interest of the people, played by the rules, which holds everybody to the same standard, and there has to be consequences for bad behavior. And for me, if you have that character in any system of government in Africa, it will do better than it is doing currently. But having said that, we also have our peculiar nature, which is of course the multicultural nature of Nigeria. The idea that you have 250 languages, the religious divide, and the history of Nigeria. So it also introduces some peculiar traits within the Nigeria conversation. And so in some countries where you have about 2-3 tribes, it is easy to rally and do a lot of things. But here, it requires a whole lot more work to bring people together behind a political leadership that actually works in the best interest of the people. And politics is then negotiated here along those divides and differences, which also complicates what comes out of it. To that extent, therefore, political change becomes increasingly difficult because the instruments of the states are often beholden to who is in power, and then we struggle to either hold them accountable or to fire them from the job, which is actually what we should do. It shouldn't be a big deal to fire people from the job if they are not doing very well.
But it's a difficult process.
Yes, it is a difficult process for the reasons I laid out.
Especially in Africa.
Yes, for the reasons I laid out, it's a difficult process. But it has been happening.
So how do we maneuver? How do we get around it?
So it's consistency.
To ensure that change.
It's consistency. It's consistent because. So the idea that we give up, we can't do anything anymore, it can't work. We have to keep testing, poking the bear. We have to keep pushing to get those who are in authority to do better. But the other thing I think I said this in Lagos is the idea that we are helpless in the face of obviously unpopular and not so effective leadership that we have in this country is wrong in my view. We have to also start being creative the way we respond. So I give you an example that I gave in Lagos. I said, can we imagine a situation where in this country or in a particular state or in a particular local government, people feel disenchanted with a leader and he walks into a hall, nobody stands up. He greets the crowd, nobody responds. Even if the person's heart is made of stone, if it happens in 2, 3, 4, 5 places, it will give him a cause for pause. There is a country, I can't remember again, where because of their frustration with their government, at a particular time every evening they put off all the lights and the city goes dark as a way of telling the government that they don't agree with the way they're operating. There was this other country where they banged the pan for 5 minutes at a particular time during the day as a protest. So there are a lot of things we can do that are symbolic but really, really creative to force those in power to begin to think people are really, really angry with us. We're not accepted here anymore. You just imagine the president or a governor walks into a room and nobody stands up. He's ignored. So as much as we look at how difficult things are to make change, to change the way government is functioning, we also have to start doing the little things to show our displeasure with the political system. But the final thing I want to say is that we should not also outsource the process of solving our problem all to government. In communities where we live, people can also provide leadership in cleaning up the streets, in helping the kids go to school, to make sure that the schools are properly taken care of. So there are a lot of things we can do. And when we talk about the little fires, imagine if every community is taking action, say around schools, say around cleaning their neighborhood. It becomes a national thing. It becomes a national practice. And there is a way you can behave at the local level that shows out the leadership for what they are without you even saying anything.
How does change help in development, or how does it stall development? Because Professor Osito Ogbu, the former economic advisor to the president, wrote a book which he called Development as Attitude. And I want to change the title and say Change as Attitude. Is there a way we can imbibe this philosophy of change to the point that it becomes an attitude, it becomes part of us?
Yeah, I think we can, because again, change happens regardless of what we do. So even if today we say we're not doing anything anymore, we're not engaging the system anymore, we're done with this country, we're done, it will still change. It is just that it's going to change into something that is going to be dangerous or scary for all of us, because change and time,
something that we can't predict.
Yes, so change and times are not value neutral. You have to put something in for time to give you what you want, or for change to give you what you want. So if we don't do anything, like Professor Yemesiban just said, it's going to happen anyways. It's just that you may not like what is going to come out of it. And so not engaging is out of the question. But to your point, the concept of development means that something is improving in a substantial way.
Which is change.
Which is change. And so there has to be a clear hunger to be better. We need to have the attitude of not enough. So this whole idea, they built us a road, no, we should never say it is enough, because the world is constantly changing and things are improving. Why do we want to limit ourselves to what is available and not what is possible? Our limitation should be about what is possible, not what is available. And so that's why you need an incisive and an exciting leader who then tells you, I need to take you to the moon, like Kennedy did. Somebody who creates a vision bigger than where we are. Somebody that paints a picture of things that are possible, things that we don't see, but begins to help us imagine our capacity and capability as a people to do much, much better. And that's why I say it's the principle of not enough. It is not enough we have roads. It is not enough we have water. We want more roads, we want more water, we want to fly. So that for me is the trust of a nation that wants to grow, and the people that want to be better than what they are.
And America is a good example.
Exactly.
With the level of development, we still hear things like "Make America Great Again." And somebody is talking about hope and all that, which means that change is constant.
Yes.
Okay, let's go to the concluding part of your book, How Not to Carry Out Advocacy. So, how shouldn't we carry out advocacy?
Again, these are not biblical norms. These are just my own experience. When I try to do advocacy, or when I engage with people, I try to connect with them beyond just the issues. I try to listen to them, to understand where they're coming from. And then I try to tell them why I think we can do better and how we can do better. So it's not a function of we want you to, but also how we can get there. And so it is a relationship that requires some level of respect across the table. So I said something about you don't demonize those who you want to work with. So it is okay to say government is corrupt. This government has not done well. This government is corrupt, or this government has been inefficient. But it's a whole different thing to come in and say this government is demonic. You see what I mean? So it's demonic. So just the language we use, it is important. It doesn't mean we shouldn't acknowledge what is bad, or we shouldn't condemn what is bad. But I'm just saying that when you demonize, when you otherize the next person, it makes conversations difficult. If Nelson Mandela could deal with these guys who were creating mayhem in what's the name again? KwaZulu Natal.
KwaZulu Natal.
And all the killings that was happening there. He knew the guys were responsible, but he still had to engage with them. So don't demonize. Don't tell lies. Don't come to people, government officials who sometimes trust you, and tell them things that is not true just because you want them to agree with you. Because you then put them in a position where they go back inside. They look like fools. And it destroys your relationship. It destroys your credibility as an advocate. It's also important not to take the things that are said to you in confidence and use that to go and brag in the beer parlor. Because sometimes when you meet with duty bearers and government officials, they open up to you about some of the things going on behind the scene that is making the change you want impossible or difficult. You shouldn't take those things and trivialize them and use them to tell stories. Again, it's a betrayal of trust. So, and then you don't go in there pulling down other people who are working in the same space because you want to be the only man standing. So what I was sharing there are the things I've seen over the years that made the work of advocates difficult, and the things that have also worked for me. And I felt that if it worked for me, it could work for someone else.
Okay, let me go to specifics. When you talk about offering or giving monetary or other inducements, are you going to advocate for change without probably spending money?
No, you have
Sometimes you have to bring people to a room.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need to facilitate their transportation and what have you. So how do you do that?
We know when we're inducing people and when we're supporting people. We know. I mean, everybody knows, regardless of how, we say it, or we know. So, as an advocate, I've tried to platform people. That is to say, you're doing a great job. We need you to come to this place and speak about what you're doing. And because we have the network, we make it possible for you to, be in that platform. That is a way of acknowledging progressives in government and the great work that they're doing, and giving them a platform to sell themselves to the global world. That is something you can do for somebody you're working with. But it's different that you carry money, to go and give, to say, oh, help me sponsor this bill. No, we know. So someone has asked me this question before, and I said to this person, I said, listen, you know when you're inducing people and when you're supporting people. Yes, support people, don't induce them. We know that. I think every human being knows that line.
So how can those in advocacy, how can they do their job and not be accused of inducements? And I'll give you an example. I know that some NGOs have tried to engage people in the National Assembly, have tried to engage people in the MDAs, taking them to conferences, providing transportation, blah, 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 blah. Is that not a kind of inducement? Or how do you walk that thin line of inducement and facilitation?
So I've also been in a project where we had a recurring allowance for government officials who were working with us. And
that's not an inducement?
No, I don't think it is, because they're doing work. They're doing something extra from their day job. We're working with them in the evenings, they're staying away from their families, and we felt that had to be compensated. So, and it is declared, so it's not so again, like I said, when you induce, you're inducing. But in this case, they signed for their money. It is on the record that they received this money for this. If they're getting transport allowance, sometimes because you're bringing them to places that is outside of their work area, so it is not in their ordinary journey to go to work. You pay for that thing, you pay for their time. So yes, I think, of course, you can overdo it. And again, you know when you are. You know when you overdo it.
Okay, let's conclude. And I would end just the way we started. Is change possible in Nigeria?
I'll give you two answers. Change is happening in Nigeria already. It's just that we don't like the direction of it. At least I don't like the direction of it. I think we should change into something better. So regardless, change is possible in Nigeria. It's just the kind of change that is the issue. The second,
whether it's good change,
yes,
bad
yes. The second answer is that yes, good changes can happen in Nigeria. Is happening in Nigeria. Will continue to happen in Nigeria. We just have to stay on it.
Jude Udoilo, thanks for coming.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
And that's our program for today. I am Vin Martin Obiora Ilo in Abuja, Nigeria. Thanking you for staying with us.